How can I set healthy boundaries with my loved ones, friends, and coworkers? That is today's viewer question, and boy, isn't that one that so many of us struggle with. Myself included for much of my life. I think that so many of us were raised to think that it was somehow rude to say no. And so we were kind of raised to be people pleasers. Unfortunately, I think that has really backfired and done more harm than good for many of us, because we end up giving and giving and giving to the point of depletion, and then we have nothing left to give. So I want to share a few stories with you, aha moments that I've had, and then how I actually learned to set boundaries. And it's a process that I still use to this day. So it's about 20 years ago. Actually, I think it's been more than 20 years ago. It's my first aha moment in terms of setting boundaries. So I was 24, maybe 23, 24. I was in my first job post-PhD. My first year out in academia as a professor, and I was learning the ropes and I was trying to do it all, and I was working insane hours trying to prep all my classes, work with students, get my research lab started up, do all my service requirements that come with being a university professor, and I got sick. Now, the first thing I got was the stomach flu, and that lasted for about 4 days, and that was a 4-day period with the stomach flu. Really wasn't eating a lot, wasn't able to keep a lot down, and I started feeling a lot worse, and I just thought that it was the fact that I hadn't eaten much in 4 days. And my then husband said, you know what, this feels like more than just the flu. I want to take you to the doctor. And I was like, no, I'm fine. That man saved my life because he got the doctor to work me in. He's like, she's really sick. I'm really worried about her. At this point, I was getting really dizzy, and I thought it was just the nausea. I wasn't thinking clearly at all. Went to the doctor. He said, you have 2 choices. I can put you in an ambulance, or your husband can take you to ICU, but you're going into the hospital today. My stomach flu had weakened my immune system, and I had contracted viral pneumonia. I was in ICU for 7 days. So my work was trying to figure out how to cover my classes because I was so sick. I obviously couldn't teach. Everything blew up, right? And the analysis at the end of the day, I was really sick, right? I almost died. My doctor later told me that had my husband not brought me in to see him, and I had not gone into the ER, to ICU, I probably would have died within 4 hours on that particular day. That's how sick I was. And it snuck up on me, right? I didn't even realize how sick I was. And you know why I got sick? It's because I wasn't setting boundaries. Now, I would love to tell you lessons learned. I set healthy boundaries from then on, but I'm nothing if not a slow learner. And life is a process. Healing is a process. That was my first foray. But it would take numerous cosmic 2x4s after that for me to realize that you got to set healthy boundaries, not just once, but numerous times to make sure you're getting your needs met. So over a couple of decades, I worked out a process that works well for me. And I want to share that with you today. And here's the caveat. Practice, practice, practice. Refine, tweak, reassess, and that's actually going to be part of my steps when we get to the end of the process. Because life happens, things change, relationships change, situations change, and sometimes former boundaries that you set don't work anymore. So be open and know that it's not a one and done. It may take some additional work as you continue to evolve and take better care of yourself, and that's okay. So step number 1, this is the easy part. Figure out what's not working. And this is usually super easy because it comes in the form of something that really irks us. And we're like, whoa, why am I so mad? It's because my boundaries were violated. So then my question is always, did you set a healthy boundary in the first place? And 5-10 years ago, my answer was usually no. I would get upset when I felt like my boundaries were violated, but if I was honest with myself, it was because I hadn't set a healthy, effective boundary in the first place. And you can't blame somebody else for stepping over your boundaries if they don't even know what they are, right? Nobody is a mind reader. So figure out what you don't want. And that usually is provided for us on a silver platter by the universe when something happens that triggers us or that we feel like is a violation of our boundaries. And I'm talking about personal space. I'm talking about energetic boundaries. I'm talking about anything where you're just like feeling used or taken advantage of or really irked with somebody else's behavior. So what do you not want? That's usually a given. So then you got to go to the flip side. What do you want? What do you wish had happened in the situation? Or maybe it's you wish the situation had never happened. And then that's where you go into that deep dive of, okay, here's my expectations and here's how I want things to happen. Did I even set a healthy boundary in the first place? Did the other person know? Was I clear enough? Because that's the other thing. Sometimes we think we've set a healthy, effective boundary, but it just did not get through. It does not compute with the other person. And especially friends and family. This is a hard one. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about setting healthy boundaries with your kids. And she's like, that's something I've never been good at. And I was like, well, okay, then you can't expect your kids to get it overnight. Because if they have 10, 15, 20 years of expectations around you not setting healthy boundaries and you dropping everything for them, then you setting one healthy boundary probably not going to compute that somehow is now all pervasive, right? It takes practice. It takes consistency. It takes reinforcement. People will treat us as we ask to be treated, but there's a learning curve. There's a learning process. So I'm going to give an example of myself. So a number of years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I had a boss that I would bend over backwards to help her with anything. We kind of had that part professional, part friendship. And as a result, because I saw her as my friend, even though she was my boss, I really, really didn't want to let her down. So I would do things like, she would come into my office and ask me to write a 100-page report, and I would say, absolutely, I'll do that. I'm not the only person in my department. Could I have asked for help? Yeah. Did I? Not until I was 3 weeks and almost 100 pages in and feeling like I was just drowning in the paperwork. That was my bad. I didn't set a healthy boundary with her. I just said yes. I jumped the moment that she asked me to do something. She would email all hours of the day and night, and I had notifications set up on my phone that if she emailed me, I'd get them. So I was answering her all hours of the day and all hours of the night. Again, I knew I didn't want that, but I had not set a healthy boundary with her. And so because she was my boss for several years, it wasn't until kind of the end of that journey where I was doing my own healing work that I was like, oh my gosh, I've created a monster because I never set a healthy boundary. No wonder she expects me to drop everything to answer her calls, to answer her texts, to answer her emails, to work on Christmas Day. Actually worked with her on Christmas Day to get something done that she wanted us to get done. Whole nother story. Anyway, that was another big aha moment for me. Why am I working on Christmas Day? The university is closed. There is nobody there. The buildings are locked down, and yet we're emailing back and forth for hours. Why am I working on Christmas Day? So, figure out what you don't want. I didn't want to work on Christmas Day. Figure out what you do want. Wow, I didn't set any healthy boundaries here. I need to figure out how to do this better. And I want you to dive down a little deeper. So this is like a step 2B of figuring out what you do want. Get really clear. What is it that you want? And I want you to think broad perspective. You're like, if it's work, what are my working hours going to be? Do I need to block time out for me during my work day to get stuff done? So one of the things I started doing to set healthy boundaries when I had that particular boss was I started blocking out times, because at work, we have a shared calendar where people can see when you're available to meet and when you're not. They can't see what you're doing. It's an option, right? You can set it so they can see what you're doing, or you can just say busy. So I started setting time. I started blocking time, because what was happening is I wasn't getting any of my own work done because I kept doing everything she was asking me to do. And so my own stuff was slacking. And then I was working these insane hours because I was so busy at work working on her stuff instead of my stuff. So I started blocking out time on my Google Calendar, and it would just show up as busy. But she honored that because it was a Google Calendar and I was busy. Even if I was just in my office with the door closed, working on my stuff or answering emails or dealing with grading student papers or whatever it was, I started setting healthy boundaries around my own time. If I didn't want to meet at 5 o'clock on a Friday, I blocked that out. I set my available hours from 9 to 5, or that kind of thing. So maybe a little easier to do at work, so you might want to go the easier route. Like, practice makes perfect, so start with something that feels a little safer, a little easier. So sometimes it's easier for us to set boundaries with people further out in our social circle. So it's easier to set boundaries with coworkers than it is with friends. It's easier to set boundaries with friends than it is with our kids or our spouse or insert loved one, right? So just start playing with it. Get really clear about what it is that you want. Then you got to implement, right? So get that clarity and start exploring ways that you can make that happen. So for me, again, one of the first things I did was setting boundaries around my time, because I was not getting my own work done because I was too busy doing her stuff. And that was my own fault because I never set a boundary around that. So I started blocking out time. I'm going to answer email during this window. I'm going to work. I'm setting aside these 3 hours on this day to work on this project that I need to get done. Part of that is then learning how to say no. And we've talked about this on the YouTube channel before, how to say no and how to deal with those hurt, negative emotions that happen when we feel like our boundaries are crossed. But part of that is really not going into auto-respond, not going into reaction. If someone asks you to do something, you have the right to say, and this was one of the earlier strategies that I used with my boss in that situation, let me check my schedule and get back to you. So after I finished that 100-page report that she asked me to write, I was like, I don't want to do that again. The next time she asked me to take on a project, let me check my schedule and get back to you. Now, if you're in a work situation and you have a fear that you're going to be fired if you don't say yes, what I found worked and what I used in my own situation was, first of all, I figured out, do I even want to take on that project? And if the answer was no, I would just say, I'm so sorry, but I'm kind of swamped with this project and this project and this project that you just gave me. So I really don't have, if you want those done, I don't have time to do this. If it is something that you want to do, then you need to ask for help. So she came to me, sometimes it was her projects I had no interest in, and I would just say, you know what? I'm still working on that report that you wanted me to write. And that that takes a lot of time. So I can't add anything else to my plate right now and get that done in a timely fashion. But sometimes she would bring things to me that I actually did sound interesting. And so I would say to her, you know what? That sounds like a really interesting project. I'd love to do it, but I need your help because here's my plate. Here's everything that's on my plate right now. I don't have room to put this project in. So could you take this and delegate that to someone else? And then I'd be happy to take that time I was working on that project to spend working on this project. And you can do that with your kids. You can do that with your spouse. Do I really want to take that on? And if the answer is no, that's practicing saying no and setting those healthy boundaries, saying, you know what? I looked at my schedule. I just don't have time. I just can't get that done for you. I'm sorry. You don't even have to give a reason. If it feels better to you, and I truth be told, I did do this at first. I would give a reason. I would feel like I had to justify why I was saying no. And if that's where you are, then that's where you are, and that's fine. But at some point, you want to get to a point where you can just say, you know, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Or just leave out the sorry part. No, I can't do that for you. Period. But if it's something that you want to do and you're feeling overwhelmed, you look at all the responsibilities and you're like, okay, there's this thing that I'm currently doing that I really don't want to do and I don't enjoy doing it. So how can I delegate and ask for help? Can my kids help with the chores? Can I have my spouse take the kids for 4 hours every Saturday so that I can go do this thing, right? So as opportunities arise, really get clear. This is part of setting healthy boundaries. Do I want to do this or not? The answer is no. It's practicing saying no. The answer is yes, it's okay, yeah. But I don't have any time. My plate is full. So I need to delegate this. I need to offload this to somebody else so that I can do something that's more fulfilling and more rewarding. Last but not least, it's a continual, as I talked about earlier on, it's a continual reassessment. This boundary may work today, but 2 weeks from now, 2 years from now, maybe that's not an effective boundary for you anymore. Maybe circumstances change. My boss retired, I got a new boss, right? I had to figure out how to set boundaries with him because different personalities, different people, different interaction. As your kids get older, maybe you can ask them to help more around the house because now they're older and they're more responsible. Or you can tie it to their allowance if you do allowance or something like that. It's about figuring out what you need and setting healthy boundaries to make sure you get your needs met. So, quick recap. Step 1, which is usually the easiest step, figure out what you don't want. And usually that's easy because you're mad or you're upset or you're irked or you're frustrated or blah, 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 right? Insert emotion because something has just triggered you. Number 2, figure out what you do want. And 2B is dive deep and get really, really clear about what you want. Because it does no good to set a boundary that you're not super excited about setting. And you're just going to have to revise tomorrow because you didn't do your job in the first place of figuring out what you wanted. So deep dive that one. Then start exploring. Mark out times on your calendar for you and treat it like a doctor's appointment. Like that, I would never cancel a doctor's appointment that took me 2 months to get in to see the specialist. That's how important it is. Schedule in self-care time. Schedule in time for you to get your projects done. Schedule in time for X, Y, and Z, the things that are really important to you. Schedule those in. This is a process that I do every Sunday night. Now, some of it's kind of on auto, right? Like I've set my calendar availability so that I'm only available from 9 to 5. And I usually also block out some hours in the morning to get stuff done. I also usually block out at least 1 hour at the end of the day to close out my day and take care of the last minute details of things that need to get done that day. So block that time out for yourself and honor that. You absolutely deserve it. And then it's just explore, figure out what works for you and what doesn't. It is trial and error. It does take time. Different things are going to work with different people, and that's okay. Practice, practice, practice. Keep trying. Keep staying consistent. And like I said, if someone is used to you always saying yes, it's going to take time for them to honor your boundaries because this is a new thing. And it may be you sit down with them, depending on your relationship. For someone really close to you, you sit down with them and you're like, hey, I'm working on setting healthy boundaries for myself and I need your help. But you're going to notice that some things are going to change. I'm no longer just going to drop everything when you need me. Because if I've got something else going on that I've scheduled into my schedule, I'm not going to abandon it. And that's important for me to do, and that's important time for me. And I want to be a healthy role model so that you know how to set effective boundaries for yourself. Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just that you start tweaking and changing behaviors and you see what happens. So, and then practice, and then you reassess, knowing that life happens, things change, and your boundaries are evolving. I hope that that answered your question. I hope that that serves you. Much love. Keep those questions coming in. Dr. Mary at drmarypritchard.com. And I'll see you next time.